Good afternoon and happy almost Purim tomorrow evening. Today is an exciting day because I'm actually sitting in front of the piece of art that prompted our month exploration of Jewish events in 20th century art with the amazing Professor Dr. Carol Salas, who's with us for much of this month. And I want to ask you next time you're at Temple, at either campus, Beck or Schaefer, I want you to look at the doorway you're walking through and the mezuzah that is on that doorway. And notice how exquisite whatever doorway it is that mezuzah is. Well, there's a person behind the choosing of that mezuzah and so much of the art at the synagogue, from the smallest of item, a mezuzah, to the largest of items, the Dali. Behind me, there is a congregant, a lay leader, Susan Podolski, who has done so much work in finding the right pieces, the right artists, vetting artists, figuring out what would look right at the temple. And so she cannot be with us in person today, but I'm going to share with her share with you her PowerPoint about this incredible Dali sculpture that's behind me and the family that donated it. And then we'll go on to Dr. Salas to reflect on Dali's larger life and legacy. And like many things, Dali is a complicated figure, and we will address some of that today. So I want to just give a little inside baseball before I go to Susan's slide. So a few weeks ago, we stood actually in the spot where I am, looking at the space where the Dali would sit. Art Siegel had made a foam board the size of it, so we knew how large it would be, where it would fit. This niche happened to be here. I think we have a lot of TVs around now for video displays, so there might have been a TV put there, but this niche was already in existence. What was not there is the Western Wall stone that's behind. Now, if you've been in the sanctuary of Temple Bethel, you know that on the wall behind the ark is Jerusalem stone. And as we stood here, someone made a comment, and this shows how much everyone's opinion matters, that it would be so cool to have the Jerusalem stone here, reflecting the Jerusalem stone in the sanctuary. It's almost like we're like Spidey or Batman or Catwoman or whoever has X-ray vision, that we're seeing through with the X-ray vision, the wall that's behind the ark, and it's come out here. It's very powerful and magical. It's on a pedestal. There's a very subtle, very dignified looking low rope that keeps people off of it. And it's quite a substantial sculpture. I was here the day put in place, and there were quite a few people that were putting it in place here. So it's just magnificent. And next time you're at services, hopefully you'll get to look and see it. So I'm going to share with you Susan's research about the family that donated this and about Dali and this particular sculpture. And then Carol will take us into more detail just to give you a sense of the complexity of the man, the artist. The first slide. Each morning when I awake, I experience a supreme pleasure, that of being Salvador Dali. So the modesty, you can see, is not there. He really marched his own drummer, which is the power of his art and the uniqueness and groundbreaking work that he did. He was not humble, as you can see from that quote. So how did we acquire this Dali behind me? We've congregants, the Malnicks, and Al Malnick has left his mark on much of the Miami Beach landscape since he moved here in 1956. If you've ever been in the Forge, that is his creation from the heyday when the Rat Pack used to go there, and involvement in so many charitable organizations, including, as you can see on the screen, Make-A-Wish, the Jackson Memorial Hospital, Mount Sinai Hospital, and just a genuine love for supporting people's lives. He himself, like many of us, had family that was not born here, but born in other lands. He is the son of Russian Jewish immigrants. And then he himself served in the Army Reserve and his law degree, was active in the University of Miami Law, and then had real estate investments, including that Forge restaurant, and an eye for art that he would bring into the restaurant. Some of the things that were already there, including original Dalis and Rousseau's and Ascents from Napoleon's bedchamber that were already in the Forge. when he bought it. His philosophy in buying pieces of art when he did is that he wants something that is unique, that is irreplaceable, that maybe the craft doesn't any longer exist. And that's the very unique way this Dali was made, individual and unique. So he has a mammoth collection. I've seen pictures of the storage where this was before it came here. And he loves different styles that are all together. And in the same way that his law career reflected a variety of people that he represented, so too his art represents a real range, which I think is really, I love art tremendously. And there's not one style I like. I like the moderns a lot, but I love the pre-Raphaelites. I love, there's so many different things that I love. And I think he reflects that eclectic taste in what he collected. He's also very philanthropic, obviously with this donation to the synagogue, this very valuable piece from Dali. He is committed to supporting causes and charities to make a difference. And they are very involved with Make-A-Wish Foundation, that important charity. And here are some other philanthropic activities that he's involved with, including the Malnick Family Athletic Center at St. Andrews in Boca, the Holocaust Documentation Center in Hollywood, an incredible place some of us have visited for the Eichmann, Capture of Eichmann exhibit, funding at the Miami School of Medicine, and you can see a whole range of things here. His legacy is his children. Between he and Nancy, they have 10 children, and they've been members of Temple Beth El through 2009, coming through our past president and personal friend, Mark Sunshine, who brought Al and the family to the synagogue. And from the beginning, they've really been talking about donating a piece of art to the synagogue, which means so much to them, where they celebrated happy things. So this is a better picture of what you see behind me. This is the Western Wall sculpture made in 1980. It is attributed to Dali. As some research was done, that's why they chose to use the word attributed. It is attributed to Dali, 7 feet tall, and it sits on a Jerusalem stone marble base. It's perfect. It fits perfectly, as I said, in this niche that was here, and the Jerusalem stone behind it. So let me just look up. So that this signing and the Val Suani foundry of this process, that is, when you're closer, that is here. I feel like I'm on The Price is Right. I'm not sure if you can see what I'm saying, but hopefully that is the signature, and that is, if you come to the synagogue, that is in the lower right-hand corner of the piece. What happens, it's a special process of metal casting in which molten metal is poured into a wax mold, and then as the metal sets, the wax melts. Very wise prophet. This is artist proof 3 of 3, and it was cast in 3 proofs. Some may be in the Louvre. They're not sure where the third is. So at the top there, it says Baruch Hashem. Let me just go back so you can see where we're looking. Baruch Hashem, blessed is the name of God. It's etched in, or blessed is God's name, is etched in the wall, and it depicts a line of men and women praying next to the Western Wall. One of the reasons I wanted to do this month, inspired by Dali, is his life really spanned the greatest events of the 20th century, the most horrific events of the 20th century. And to think about artists interacting with what is going on, he had an infatuation with Jerusalem in '67 and with men and women praying at the wall. And that is what he did. Carol will talk more about this, about how tied really Dali was to Israel or not. But he chose to create 25 paintings to commemorate Israel's 20th anniversary. And as you know, Carol's found in her research, and Susan did as well, there were some fascist leanings that Dali had earlier in his life. And so this was a way for him to redeem himself, but some were surprised because of his the fascist leanings that he had. And so you can see on the screen some of the pieces that he created. including something in the president's residence, which Carol will talk more about, but I think he did not come although this says here that he did. So Carol, we may have different information on this, maybe a different time. He made a statement. I think he didn't visit. That's what happened. When the menorah was placed and the Western Wall were placed on the market, he said, "You, the Jewish people, the chosen people, the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as a sign of appreciation for the firmness of your way in observing the traditions of the fathers, I created this menorah and this Western Wall. As you pray to your ancestors, accompanied by your unshakable faith, I want to express in clear light these aged symbols, my great admiration for your people." So there. After his death, there were smaller editions that were sold by Delacorte, who purchased this famous top Western Wall picture and the menorah, and then there were some smaller editions of this Western Wall. You can see this 15-inch tall here in the lower right corner. Reminds me of that Mizell that is there as well. And Delacorte, who collected, is also the creator of the 16-foot sculpture, the Candelabra of Peace. This is something that appears on, I'm not sure, I think it's on either currency or on stamps, but it's a familiar image that is there and is now at the airport. And this actual sculpture that's behind me will be dedicated on our Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel Independence Day services. We couldn't think of a better day to dedicate this sculpture and celebrate the Malnik's donation. And on Friday, May 6th, when we celebrate Israel, Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel Independence Day. So we hope that you will join us. That I'm going to double check that time because I don't think that time is right. I think it is a 6 p.m. service yes, this is it. Sorry, I will correct that slide. It is a 6 p.m. service that night, the first Friday of the month. So before we go on to Carol, any comments or questions? How many of you have seen this in person? I have to put this down a little bit to be able to look at you and see. So Susan, the Freemans, anyone else? Phil, you'll see it Friday because I think you and Aliyah this Friday. It's really very powerful. I think I brought, when we had a day at the synagogue with our third graders, we brought kids to it and they just interact with it amazingly. They see things that we may or may not see, and it's just, we're so lucky to have it here. And just Susan Podolski's worked very hard to get all these pieces, the new piece in honor of Rabbi Dayan, the pieces that were part of the rebuild, just they all go so beautifully. And there was an intention, if you notice, there's not like pictures on walls so much, it's more big sculptures. And there's another one coming in a few weeks in the sanctuary that was intentional. So that it's these big sculptures, you don't have a mishmash. A lot of synagogues, when you walk in, you see a mishmash of different decades and styles and arts, and we want to create a more uniform feel. And I think it's been achieved really beautifully. And again, these are things from that tiny menorah on the doors that are around me. I'm looking at these large things. There's people behind this that make decisions and decide these things. And we're just so lucky to have such wise, incredible people to do that. So if there's no comments or questions, then I'm going to hand things over to Carol. Go ahead, Carol.
Okay. Wait, Jay, can I talk to you? I want to get rid of the slides on the left side.
Play from current slide.
I want to go back. Okay, how do I get rid of this? Let me see, I'll try to do it like this. Okay. Okay, can you all hear me? Yes?
We can hear you. There's nothing, you're not sharing anything yet, just so you
Oh,
know.
Okay. What should I do? I don't see what I didn't share. I thought, wait, I'll do it here. Share.
And then you have to click on the item you're sharing. There we go. Now go to your first slide.
Wait, I see you and I.
If you go to slideshow, don't worry about us, just, we see the slideshow, but just go
Okay.
from the slideshow. Don't
Yeah.
worry about seeing us
Okay,
or not. I'll keep an eye on the chat and everything.
okay. Okay, can you
Yeah,
see me now?
Yes, we
All
have
good.
the first slide.
Okay. This is Jean-Paul Delcourt, who worked didn't really work with Dali. He bought from Dali the rights to his works, especially the two, the Menorah and the Wailing Wall. And he paid him $500,000. And with that, Delcourt made Dali Universal, and it became for him an industry. And he created even more after Dali died. But here you can see a smaller version, and he made limited edition of these smaller versions, 150 of these gilded bronze images. And then actually 6 years after Dali's death, he created this medallion, a commemorative medallion, and he called it Jerusalem 3000. And it celebrates 3,000 years since King David made Jerusalem the capital for the Jewish people. And then that's the end of Delcourt, but he made a real business out of just the two images that Dali created. And then I found this, which I thought was fascinating. Dali made an etching of Moshe Dayan. And here he shows a wonderful image of him smiling. And after the 6-Day War, he became certainly a worldwide symbol of the power and the prestige of Israel. And he made multiple etchings in different colors of Dayan. And then what I want to focus on is this was his first set. He did a number of Jewish themed, he did first paintings, and these were to be ready by the April 3rd, 1968, which was the 20th anniversary of the State of Israel. And for that, Dali prepared 25 paintings, and then he made, these were all commissioned by Shorewood Publishing in New York. And the sets of lithographs were 250 sets of lithographs with the 25 paintings, those images. And they were ready for the 20th anniversary, and they all sold. The paintings are in various collections, as are the lithographs. But what I found very interesting in looking at these, they're totally different from when you think of Dali. If you go to any book on Dali, beautiful glossy images of his work, you see these photo-like dream paintings that he became so noted for. And what you're going to see now is a different version of Dali, and really beautifully illustrated. And what he created, I'll show you a sampling of some of these lithographs. Some of them refer to contemporary history of Israel, and some to the biblical history. And he used here watercolor and beautiful colored inks. And he also used gouache, which is like a cousin of watercolor. It's more opaque, and you add water and you get really radiant color. And you'll see the depth of the color, the saturation that he gets by using gouache. And the style is so different from his well-known paintings. What he creates are really energetic and simple, and I think very much filled with feeling. I don't think he could have done it without. This is the commission. He was commissioned to do this. He probably must have consulted with some Jewish people who he knew, And they're serious. And I think any person doing commission is going to be serious. And also he used photographs, and you will see that in some of the images. And the first image became kind of an icon for the whole set of lithographs. And this is called Aliyah, meaning ascent. And the Hebrew word Aliyah means either you would use it to describe climbing steps or climbing a mountain. And in the biblical sense, Aliyah meant a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, to the holy place at Jerusalem. And in modern day parlance, whether we're speaking English or Hebrew, Aliyah means that you are emigrating to Israel, that you're going to live in Israel. And I think the image, if you look at it, it's a vision that he shows to recreate Jewish life, in spite of all the obstacles the Jews have experienced in various lands. And you see this pioneer drapes across his chest, a very impressive image, the flag of Israel, and he looks up and he looks proud and defiant. And the situation really in Israel, as it started, some ascended of their free will, the Chalutzim. And there were pioneers who worked the land and defended the land and started building on it and have created a totally technological society today. And others ascended, made Aliyah, because they had no other place to go, that this was the land of refuge for many displaced Jews. This is another one of his images, which I think is really very powerful because of the simplicity of it. And here he's showing a biblical scene. A voice is heard in Ramah, and this is Rachel. And the biblical story is that Nebuchadnezzar in 1526 BC expelled the Jews, burned the temple, killed Jews, and took many Jews into exile. And so here is the mother lamenting, and she doesn't want any comfort. She's lamenting. She doesn't know if her children have been killed or if they have been taken into exile in Babylonia. But on a modern level, and look over here, you can see, if you see here, there's either a beautiful woman or a child. I think this is kind of showing her thoughts about her loss and what to do. But the image on a modern level really stands for Jews being cut off from their roots, from their language, from their land, from their literature. It means a lot when you grow up somewhere and you're completely cut off from what you were and what you inherited. And this is the Wailing Wall, and this is very interesting to look at because you can see here that he used a photograph. This was pre-67 wall, and this is really a misnomer. He must have used a photograph that showed this. And this is, of course, the remnants of the temple in Jerusalem, what remained after the Romans came in, Herod's temple, and the Romans destroyed it. And this is the only remnant of the temple. And people have gone there for centuries, and their deepest prayers are expressed here. Many people leave messages in the wall. And what is also interesting in this image is men and women are worshiping together. And since the 67 war, the Israelis have built a plaza. And as you know, there's segregation in front of the wall, despite rulings that it seems the Orthodox still have the separation. So here you can see another image, and I just noted in the comments that he used a photograph now you can see really what the wall looks like now, and you can see here only women praying. This is from 1975, and this lithograph is the same image that you see in the object in your synagogue. And later on, this was very well distributed. Here you can see the wall today. Whoops. And then this is another one from the series, which he did called Aliyah. And it's an interesting image in that it shows here from Nehemiah. It says here, and Dali would include these images from the Bible underneath the lithographs, what inspired him. And with one of his hands, he wrought the work, and with the other, he held his weapon. And he interpreted this, I think, to show a wild horse who seems to be ready to attack this settler, this pioneer. And there's barbed wire here. And also, here's a gun in his hand, but one hand is prepared for work. And historically, what happened is that Babylon had been defeated by the Persians, and the new regime allowed the Jews to go back to Judea and to build their temple, and they functioned then under Persian rule. But Dali makes a very good, apt comparison that this story of 25 years ago, Israel in its early days, and there's still many today, the people who were the defenders, those who built the roads, those who built the various streets, the farmers, the truck drivers, the doctors, the lawyers, the professors, the teachers had to be armed. And many of them still are to this day, that they were always on alert for an attack from any direction. So I think that's a very interesting image, the parallel between now and then the state of Israel when it was forming and historically, biblically. This ship deals with contemporary history, and the ship was renamed the Eliyahu Golem because Eliyahu Golem was a prominent member of the Haganah, and he helped Jews to get illegally into Palestine then. And he died while during this time period. So the ship was renamed after him. But the ship carries Holocaust survivors. And they came in 1946. And of course, then under Palestinian rule and the British mandate, they were not able to come in. So here you can see another view of it. And actually, not only this ship, but another ship, they carried really several thousand. I think each ship had about 1,000 survivors. And they were told they cannot leave the Italian port. The Italians were following a law from the British mandate. They wouldn't allow them in. And the Jewish leaders on these ships, there were 2 ships, had enforced a hunger strike, and the people threatened they would blow up the ship and commit suicide. And what happened was they drew attention from the international community, and they were able to enter. But so they came in through the port of Haifa. And in actuality, there were 2 other ships with refugees, and they had been sunk, carrying illegal immigrants. And you can see here, the people have jumped overboard. So these are really important and I think very moving images. And this is also, what you see here is Palestine really long before it became a state. And you see parched land, land which is nothing but brown and sand and desolate buildings. And you see little people here. And this is all done with splatters of ink. And Dali has placed over them protective angels. And in actuality, when the settlers came here already, certainly late 19th century, early 20th century, the land was drought, completely parched. And you can see now what has been created. But what was done is it was noticed that around the Jezreel Valley in northern Israel, there were intermittent swamps. And so then these early pilgrims had the idea already of creating a water carrier. And so what it involved, in fact, even before Israel was a state, they had plans for doing it. And then Ben Gorion set forth the idea, and it took from 53 to 64 to create this pipeline, which sometimes you can see it on the surface, and it goes from the north of Israel, where there is water, across the central part and to the Negev. And what this did was it enabled new towns to be created where water could be available. So new towns developed. This made possible that in the Negev, crop production could develop and certainly did flourish. It made possible the population that it could be distributed more around the country because the availability of water. And up until this time, there was really a lack of proper resources. There was always a fear of invasions from Arab countries and just insufficient water. And this created really positive development. So here you can see the water carrier, and this is how it actually looks. So from the desert landscape, and Ben Gorion, in a statement about this, and he made the decision in 1951, he said Israel, they wanted a modern society, and this foundation would then create advanced technology. And of course, this water made possible everything for the population to create a sustainable agriculture, sustainable farming. So it was 4,000 people over the period of 11 years worked on this national water carrier. And this is an image which is from the 23rd Psalm. And what is interesting, though, Dali writes underneath this, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." He omits the more comforting part of the statement where it says, "For you are with me, your rod and your staff will comfort me." And when you look at this image, this is undescribable. I think this is just supposed to be a red monster. But if you look at it carefully, what I think this is a swastika. And down here, there are masses of people fleeing. And I think my only association was that this red hinged monster represents the fear of the Nazis, and the people are running, fleeing for their lives. This probably refers to death camps or being picked up. And oh, this is wonderful. Let me see if I can get this. The next one he did is of Ben Gorion. And here he shows, and I think it's important to remember at this time, this was just a few years after many survivors suddenly appeared on different shores. Many could not get into countries they wanted to because of immigration restrictions, including in the United States. They would only take so many people from each country. And Ben Gorion, in giving his opening Declaration of Independence, stated that Israel would be for its population, no matter what ethnic group, no matter what religion. And then shortly after this, first there were attacks from the Palestinians, and then the surrounding Arab countries invaded. And this took almost a year for this war of independence to finally subside. And what's funny on this is really a wonderful image of Ben Gorion. Dali gives him his own mustache. And so I tried to make a detail. And this is the curly mustache that became Dali's mark. And here you can see Ben Gorion sitting with Einstein. I thought that was such a lovely photograph. This is another one of the lithographs, and it's, I think, really inspired by what moves the song Hatikva. And you see this white dancing figure, and she stretches her arm in front of the first measure of Hatikva. And the song originated in the 1870s. There was a Zionist, Polish Zionist living in Israel who wrote the poem. And from that, in 1879, the poem was then converted at the first Zionist Congress to be the national anthem of Israel. And the key phrase in it is that this is the hope of 2,000 years, to be a free nation in our land, in the land of Zion and Jerusalem. And here are other figures busy, these tiny little figures that he makes with ink. But you can see the dancing figure with her arms stretched under the first measure, and she's on her toes like a ballet dancer. And certainly the song is performed many times for various occasions. Here is the menorah, and it's symbolic certainly of the menorah which existed in the first and the second temple. And in this giant image, the word ora and hora, ora means light, and you can see light behind the menorah. And the menorah actually is mentioned in the book of Exodus. And there is a menorah not only at the airport, which Dali designed, as you saw, but also on the grounds of the Israeli parliament. And when Israel was established in 1947, declared as a legal entity by the United Nations, the dancing started all night. And there you can actually see live footage of the celebrations in the street of people dancing the hora, the national dance, and singing through the night. And I wanted to show this because it's really an interesting example. The Romans had the largest empire the world had ever seen. And a Roman imperial architecture just spells out visually their greatest accomplishments. And so in Rome, this is the famous Arch of Titus. And on the inside of the arch, there are two reliefs. One of them shows the Emperor Titus entering the city of Rome victorious with a quadriga. And there's also an image of Victoria behind him, a personification of their victory, their greatness. They have come to Judea and they have conquered the Jews. They've destroyed the temple, and they brought back many Jewish prisoners to work for them. And so here you can see the soldiers walking in, and they're carrying these sacred trumpets from the synagogue, the temple that they destroyed, and the menorah, and they place this on the sculpture. So I've never been to Rome, and you can see this inside. But you can see this is wonderful skill. This is the first time you really see illusionism in sculpture, where you can really see, and they pass under the arch, and you can get the idea of the depth of the many soldiers who paraded into the city. And then what they did is the general of the captured people, they did this with different people that they captured. They would kill, they would execute, make a big public execution of their general, in this case, the Jews. Then they would celebrate. And usually then the emperor would go and make an offering at the temple of Jupiter to thank the god for helping them to capture more people. So they had many Jewish prisoners they brought in, besides the booty they took from the temple. And then in the year 2002, there was the Delcourt, the same man who dealt with Dali with his Jewish objects, made a great big show in the president's residence in Jerusalem. And in there were the sculptures, the two sculptures, the wall and the menorah. And then there were many of these lithographs, and he did more sets of Jewish themed lithographs. He did, and I'll show you little bits, the 12 tribes of Israel he made in 71. The works which I showed you just before from 68, those were done to commemorate the 20th anniversary. Our prophets, our historical heritage, and Moses and monotheism. And the show was called Shalom Dali, and Dali was already dead for a long time. And here you can see, these are really, this is from the series of Our Prophets, and this is King David. Here's his harp, and these are really very whimsical. And then he did a series of lithographs, Moses and Monotheism. And the title is right out of Freud, who he deeply admired. And the image is completely appropriated from Michelangelo. This was Michelangelo's image of Moses, complete with the horn. So that kind of stuff I don't admire. That's really lifting. Anyhow, what else I wanted to show you in terms of Dali admired greatly Einstein and Freud, and he met Freud. And there was Freud, by this time, was 81. He was an intellectual giant for his contribution of the conception of the unconscious. And Dali was also widely recognized, but Dali was then, I think, in his 30s. And this is one of the portraits that he did of Freud. And if you go today to London, you can see the Freud Museum, which was his house. But when Dali met him, he had just come from Vienna and had been in London just for a few weeks. But now Dali's portrait is at the head of a staircase in the Freud Museum in London. And this is what he said. He read Freud's works. And Freud, when he talked about him, he talked about the other surrealists, and he referred to them as, it's very funny what he says. After he meets Dali, and he was fascinated with Dali, and Dali said to him, he said of Freud, in the surrealist period, I wanted to create the iconography of the interior world and the world of the marvelous of my father Freud. And he disliked his own father, and interestingly writes, my father Freud. What I want to show you now is, this is, first of all, he did this sketch of Freud and he intended to give it to him as a gift. And this was after they met. And I want to read you a segment, what Freud said about him after they only had one meeting. And incidentally, in Vienna right now at the Belvedere, there's a show, it's running through May. It's called Dolly and Freud. So it's all about their relationship, and yet it only lasted one day. But Dali did this portrait, a sketch really, of Freud. And he said he got the idea sitting in a restaurant in Paris eating snails. And he saw, while he was eating, a newspaper with a photograph of Freud in it. So he made this, and he said, Freud's brain looks like a snail. So he made this image, and then he gave it to Freud's colleague, who also had just arrived from Vienna in London, Stefan Zweig, was a well-known novelist. And Zweig said, this looks more like a skull than a snail, and he didn't want to give it to Freud. And Freud actually died shortly after this happened, the sketches. But I want to read to you, and let me go back so you can look at a picture of Freud, what he said about meeting Dali. He really, I think he was impressed with him. Dali was then only 34 and Freud was 81. And the day after they met, he writes to Zweig, I really have reason to thank you for the introduction. Until yesterday, I was inclined to look at the surrealists who have apparently chosen me as their patron saint as absolute fools. He said, absolute, as in 95% with alcohol. But that young Spaniard, however, with his candid and fanatic eyes and his undeniable technical mastery, has made me reconsider my opinion. It would be very interesting to explore analytically the growth of a picture like this. And Dali brought to Freud a painting, this painting when they met in 1938 in London. And what the painting is about is, this is this Metamorphosis of Narcissus. And here I just brought this up so you can see clearly, this is by Caravaggio. And this is, of course, the story of the young man. I think he was a hunter, and he hurt many of his lovers. He only loved himself. He was completely self-absorbed. And so in the story, what the Greeks did to punish him is that he fell in love with his reflection in the water, and he tried to embrace the water out of his, I was going to say narcissism, that's how it came. And what resulted was he died and he turned into a Narcissus. And so what you see here, this is from the 17th century. This is a Baroque painting, but here you can see, here is Narcissus, and he's looking at his reflection in the wall. And then Dali, this is really when he began using these double images in full force. And here he turns him into a hand, and it reflects this image, but the head, who's looking into the water, turns into an egg, and out of the egg comes a Narcissus. And in the background is a man standing on a pedestal, and that is Narcissus before, that's the figure before he turned into a flower. And the egg has ants creeping from it. So then, what else I wanted to show you, this is another example. Here is Dali, and this was the method he said he developed from Freud. He read Freud's famous interpretation of dreams, and I think he tried to take it literally, but Freud admired him, so I have to value that. Here you can see, and the process, what he called the paranoid critical method, is you stare at something, and people do this all the time. You stare at clouds and you can see a face, or you can see some kind of image that seems to you recognizable. Or let's say you put stucco on a wall and you can see shapes forming, or sometimes you can see it in wood that has been cut and see an image from that. So that's what he's staring here at his canvas. And over here, you can see in this arcade is a vision of his wife, Gala. So this is in a nutshell. You see double images. And over here, this is really an unknown painting. It's in a private collection. But again, I chose this because of the reflection of water again. And the swans turn into elephants. And you can see the swans when you see the reflection. Can you see here? This took me a while to see it. You see the elephants here? And so the swans are sitting on the elephant's back. And over here is a young man who turns his back to it all. And so this is the example of the paranoid critical method. And he became so famous for it. I want to ask you now, what time is it? I don't have the time. I'm embarrassed to say.
It's 12:50.
Oh, okay. Does anybody have any questions? I can talk more about Dali, but I hope there's some questions.
Can you fill in his life a little bit? I put his date of birth or year of birth and death, and fill in.
Yeah, let me. Okay. Dali was from, I think he was actually, I don't know where he was born, somewhere in Catalonia. And he went to the same art school as Picasso did. And I think, I don't really know much about his biography, I'm sorry to say, but he became a part of the Surrealist group. and was with them in the very start. And the Surrealist group started in 1924. It started with Andre Breton, and Dali was in on it. And then with the rise of Hitler, he was pro-Hitler. He was also pro-Franco. And the Surrealists expelled him from the movement. And he kept on his own ways. And his work, I mean, it certainly is technical mastery. And he designed also, and I think this is interesting, he designed jewelry. He designed for ballet. He did the set designs and the costumes. He designed, I know of one opera that he designed for. He made films. Two of the films are really well known and are taken seriously. If you take a film course, you'll see a film that he made with Buñuel. I think most of you know the film where the woman, and she has her eye sliced, these really horrifying images. He designed furniture, and this is all in addition to his printmaking and painting career. And he also designed fashion. He worked, I know he knew Coco Chanel. I don't think he ever designed with her, but for sure, he worked with Elsa Schiaparelli, and they designed a dress together. I wish now, you can look this up online. They designed for Wallis Simpson, the Duchess of Windsor. And Dali painted a lobster on the dress. I think many of you may have seen he made one of the objects that he made was a telephone, and the handle of the telephone was a lobster. But his past was checkered. There's a lot of evidence Jewish art dealers in New York didn't want to deal with him. He made a statement about race, that the two races should be separated. And I read also that George Orwell, as early as 1944, said that Dali was an excellent artist and a despicable human being. So this raises the question, which all the time, you really have to be, if you really want to appreciate art forms, you have to separate the man from the object. And you can get a lot of appreciation from that. And I think
what Susan said in her PowerPoint is really true, or you said, one of you said that that Israel series was a smart move on his part.
Yeah.
Because it let him go into a space that people might not have expected.
Yeah. It gave him Jewish clientele. It really, when I looked at these works, I'd never seen them. It changed my opinion of him. And you can look at him. I received the research, a lot of the research, from a professor at Emory, Dr. David Blumenthal, who owns one of the sets. And he wrote in detail about the images. And he made a very good point, really. This was a commission, and he took the commission as a serious artist and certainly did wonderful work. And he must have consulted with Jews that he knew. I also know the saying, and I'm sure many of you have heard this, tell me who your friends are and I'll tell you who you are. And he sought friendship with Wallis Simpson. She was really Nazi sympathizer. And he did portraits for Franco. He did an equestrian portrait of his daughter and has photographs visiting the Franco home. So certainly doing these Jewish works, and they're lovely and they're strong and they're well-informed. Many artists use photographs, so don't hold that against him. That's a common device. But he's complicated, like any person, many people who still have prejudice and still can do wonderful work. I hope that.
Yes. It was a remarkable experience to learn about him, and yeah, there's definitely a story, and I think that if you think about someone whose life began at the beginning of the 20th century and ended at the end, and all the things that he's seeing, and he's in the geography where things are happening that are world famous, you've many different paths to take. And I think that the path he took is an interesting one, and that Israel was really there at the end of his life. You look at the news today and all that's going on, and it's crazy to think these countries that Jews had to flee from, like Poland in the 30s, are like now safe havens. Like, it just shows like the change that goes on in the world. It's unbelievable. I know she can't. I don't think she can talk, but your PowerPoint was amazing. People appreciate it. Any other comments or questions?
I can't see you. I want to see you when I talk. Oh,
Stop
okay.
sharing. Any other comments or questions? I hope that David Blumenthal is here, Dr.
Where is
welcome.
he?
Oh, what an honor. Oh, if you're ever in South Florida, you have an open invitation to the Dali that's behind me. We're in East Boca. We'd love to see you.
Yeah, he was professor of Judaic studies at Emory.
So, Dr. Blumenthal, do you want to add anything before we close?
Well, I think that Professor Salas has done a great job. For those of you who want to know more about that specific Aliyah series, if you just put in Salvador Dali Aliyah into Google, it should come up a reference to my website where it's the whole story is told. I like the connection with the psychoanalysts. I didn't realize that he had met Freud. I think that one of the reasons that Freud really liked him was that there's something, if you could take the subconscious and put it on canvas.
He did.
You're pretty close. He did, right. That's exactly right. And there are any number of ways that you could think about doing that. And the same thing holds true about the films. To take the subconscious of the human, which is so non-rational and non-ordered and very powerful and disconnected and free association. Dali was a master of that. And one always has to remember that he was I think probably the finest draftsman of the 20th century. So that everything, his paintings may look a little sloppy, but you may rest assured they're not. Whatever he did, and he knew what he was doing. Just amazing.
Well, the elephants in the painting, the last painting Carol shared, the detail and the talent is evident. Thank you so much for coming. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
And I shared, I think, the document you were referring to in the chat. Thank you so much, Dr. Salas. This was just incredible. Thank you, Susan Podolski, for preparing. And this is yours. Come and see it and enjoy it. And thanks to Jake, our awesome producer. Professor, did you want to say anything else? Okay, great. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. This was just fabulous and information you get nowhere else. Incredible.